strategies. And so that's the purpose of my presentation today. First of all, why is critical thinking important? I mean, it's common sense. Our students have to be able to think. Critical thinking is having an open mind, being able to analyze, evaluate information, and instead of just repeating something that's right there for you, it is actually creating some new product using your thinking. And so data from the National Assessment of Education Progress tells us that our students, even though they may be good readers, they don't think while they're reading. They can read and have no idea what they have read. So even though they may have well-developed literacy skills, the thinking is not there. And in order, of course, to be successful in school and be successful in life, they have to be able to think and to read text critically. So how do we do that? How do I teach my students to think? During my research, I found information about characteristics of very successful classrooms. And one of the major characteristics of those classrooms, other than classroom management, that the teachers had control and everything was well organized, is just time spent reading. And I know we do lots of activities with our students, but one of the biggest indicators of their success is that they actually have time to read independently on their own. There's a really good book that I read called The Book Whisperer, and it's an informational book for teachers about ways to incorporate independent reading time in your classroom and how important that is, and that students have the opportunity to choose a text of their own choosing and just to fall in love with reading, and then you can make recommendations about things that you should feel they should read. Also, we need to be able to teach them how to think like real readers think. And Goodway and Harvey have several different texts that address this, but these are called think alouds when actually we're sharing with our class and we tell them what is going through our brains as we're reading. A lot of times when I'm reading with my students, I'll stop and say, now when I read that part, my brain was thinking, or I was asking myself. Those are think alouds, things that we generally do all the time. And then these just simulate those academic conversations. As a classroom, I found that discussions are a great way to get the kids engaged and to have these academic conversations and to tell them what's going through our brains and give them a clue what they should be thinking about as they're reading. And then writing, of course. A characteristic of successful classrooms is that the kids are writing across content areas, because if they write, they are creating new products, and so they have to be able to think about what they read and then apply that and create something new. And then we teach the students to have those inner conversations with themselves while they're reading. The National Reading Panel has verified, I know we're always worried about test scores and how they'll perform on standardized tests, but if we can teach our students to think, they can think through all these questions that they're asked on standardized tests. And so we have to give them experiences with questions at a variety of levels. And questions are what learning is all about. They're the heart of teaching and learning. And so when we use good questioning techniques, our students' achievement levels increase and they become engaged in our discussions and they're active learners. Students should be the ones who are doing all the work, who are tired at the end of the day because they're so engaged and involved in our lessons. Some of the questions that we should be asking, we need to keep them open-ended, asking questions like, why, or what do you mean by that? Give me an example. What difference would it make if this happened as opposed to this in the text that we were read? Or would you say more about that? Maybe a comment that the students made, or would you tell more about whatever the information is in the text? Levels of questioning, I know we've all heard about Bloom's taxonomy, and it's all based upon that. We ask questions, first of all, to probe for details, just information from the stories, but then we take it beyond that. We ask the kids to categorize, group things together, and then to elaborate, well, why did you group these ideas together? Or how does this story make sense with this story that we read previously? And then take it a step further, we ask them to cite evidence about their elaborations. Well, why did you say that? Show me, what in the text made you think that? Something else that I came upon during my research comes from Dr. Webb's Depth of Knowledge questioning stems, and I have copies of those questioning stems for you ladies. And these are, again, based on Bloom's taxonomy. But our basic questions, just recalling what's there in the text for you, and then taking it a step further and applying that information to the skills that we're teaching, concepts that they're learning, and then they use it to analyze, to start thinking critically, and then to extend their thinking, to create some new products through writing or through class discussion. When we are talking to our friends about a book that we're reading, we don't talk about some of the things that we often ask our kids, character setting, that sort of thing, but we talk more in depth. And so through our think aloud and through our questioning, our goal is to teach our students to think like real readers, to have conversations like you would if you were in a book club. So how do we meet the needs of all students at all levels? We know that a lot of times our gifted students aren't challenged. If we give them additional work, something along the lines of what everybody else is doing, but a little more, that's not really beneficial. But I find that if we have these engaging class discussions and these open-ended activities, that meets the needs of all learners. Our goal, of course, is for everybody to reach their individual thinking potential. And so as we're doing these activities with our students, we're challenging our gifted students, but we're also using enough modeling, letting them know what's going on in our brains, and those good questioning skills to redirect their thinking so that all levels of students reach their thinking potentials. So the purpose of thinking, I've said several times, is just to expand their thinking. And we talked about creating those open-ended questions, that not every question has a specific answer. Not all questions even have to be answered specifically. It's just to create that thinking process. But one thing that's been very beneficial is to actually write those questions into your lesson plan. For me, it's really hard to think on the spot of what I should say or what would take our thinking to the next level. So if they're already written down and I've done the planning ahead of time, then it makes it easier. Common Core talks a lot about accountable talk, and so as we use this in our classroom, asking our students, well, do you have something to add? Do you agree with what the author said or what he said or what she said, and why? And just asking that question, why? And we've talked a lot about wait time, giving our students time to think. One thing that I've learned recently is to not only wait after we ask the question, but in the process of our class discussion to give a little wait time before I ask the question, and then ask the question and give them time. I find it makes my kids more responsible. If they know I'm not going to move on until I get something from them, then they know they have to contribute. So that brings me to small groups. Small groups, I know we use small group instruction all the time for reading, and they're very effective because kids feel safer in a small group. They have an increased opportunity to talk. They are more responsible for saying something because they can't kind of hide, off to the side of the room. They're right there with the other members of the group. It's smaller, so everybody has more of a part. It's more natural conversation as opposed to a whole group lesson. And generally they're more engaged with the text. It's easier to work together when it's a small group setting. So small groups are a great way to model some of these questioning strategies and to have these discussions with our students. And then providing feedback. It really doesn't do us any good to use all these activities if we don't provide our students with feedback. And so a lot of times, I know you've experienced it too, when we're in the middle of a lesson, the students' responses can go every direction. So we have to first of all ensure that we ask a lot of different questions to keep them engaged with our lesson. And then when there's confusion, we use those clarification questions. Well, why? Those sorts of questions to get them kind of back on track or to address any confusions that might be there, to get them to think about what their responses are. And then when we do get off task or off topic, to use those refocus questions to direct them back to the topic, to the direction that we're wanting to have that predetermined goal so that all of our questioning is leading them toward that goal that we want them to meet. And providing support, like I mentioned earlier, lots and lots of modeling to get our students to come to the appropriate conclusions through their reading. So some different response activities. I was looking for something that we could use, just here we go. Let's take this and try it. Writing, we said, or mentioned earlier, always is a great way to promote critical thinking. Think, pair, share, I know we use a lot with our students, but giving them time. Sometimes I have trouble with quiet, but giving them time to stop and think, and then talk to somebody else, and then share with the whole class. And then I have this article. It's by Larry Loon, and it came from Education Leadership, that gave some great ideas for student response activities. One of those is questions mailed to my teacher. And through this activity, students write down questions for their teacher on sticky notes or small slips of paper, and they actually put it in an envelope, just one envelope for the entire class. And then the last student to make the response puts the question or the envelope on the teacher's desk. That's mailing it to the teacher. But through those questions, it's not necessarily questions for the teacher to answer, but it gives the teacher a clue into what the kids are thinking, what kind of questions they're asking, how deeply they're understanding the text. Sidekick questions are the next thing that he mentions, where students become the buddy of the author, the ally, the friend of the author, and so they ask the author questions about the story, and then those can actually a lot of times be sent online to the author, and sometimes students will actually get responses back. And then to take it to the highest level, it's questioning the author, asking the author about biases or judgments that seem to be made in the text. Well, why did you write this? Or should this person, in the story, just asking questions about the characters, not basic detail kind of questions, but actually questioning the author's judgments and the author's biases. And then I use sticky notes a lot in my classroom. I find it's helpful if the kids have a sticky note there, and as they're reading, if they can write down their question or write down a question, I'll ask them to be the teacher and write a question and stick it in the text where that first came to mind. It's an easy way to keep them on task and get them to use those good questioning strategies. So I feel like there are a lot of stumbling blocks to teaching this, especially for us as third grade teachers, because I think the first one, a gradual release of responsibility. Our students come to us not very independent. We are kind of the beginning of doing things on your own, and so that gradual release of responsibility, instead of me directing activity, but getting them to be able to work on their own. And then one thing that I found very interesting, I know we teach our comprehension skills, main idea, drawing conclusions, I know we teach them individually, but to teach them quickly so that as students are reading, they have that big bank of skills to draw upon. Sometimes I feel like I draw that out over too long of a period of time. So teach them individually, but teach them quickly so they have that bank to draw upon. It seems that in education we focused on answers and kind of forgotten about questions. But if we can teach students to question as they're reading, they will learn to think critically. Kids come to us with lots and lots and lots of questions, and it seems like as they get older, they turn to more procedural questions. Well, when do I turn this in? What page do I need to be on? But to get them to ask those good questions that they're asking when they're 2 and 3 and 4 years old, to continue that, but to develop them to new levels as they become older. Instruction in questioning techniques, letting students know what's going on in your brain when you're reading. It's very helpful in overcoming these inhibitors to their critical thinking. And thoughtful questioning is what is empowering to students in order to get them to think. Now, I know I said a lot in a short amount of time. I have lots and lots of references here, and if you'd like a copy of my literature review, you're welcome to it. But do y'all have any questions? Thank you for listening to me
Thank
today.
you.